Hell yeah. Welcome everybody to the Big Ten Football Junkies podcast. We haven't done this in a really long time, so I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to introduce my partner. First and foremost, Jeremy Miller. Say what's up, my friend.
What's happening?
What's happening? I'm Tim Swanbeck. We had a podcast a few years ago, Jeremy. Life got a little busy. You started doing some other things. I've really enjoyed the ride with you, watching you and watching your videos and watching you progress over the years. Why don't you first start out by talking about that for like one quick second?
Well, we were doing fantasy football and just got to be a lot. We backed off of that. I started doing a Michigan football podcast. And after getting my YouTube channel going, I decided to switch it over to the entire Big Ten. And I think it's about time to start kicking off some of these again.
I think so too. And the reason why I wanted you to bring up your YouTube page is because I hope people that listen to this take the time to go check out some of your videos. You put a lot of hard work into it. I know your success has grown wildly big since you started doing this, and I'm super proud of you, man. And I just wanted to make sure that we gave you a shameless plug for that, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. But today's podcast is going to be a little different than we normally do. And the reasoning why, Jeremy, is because there was some relatively big news past couple of days. And that big news is your 2024 national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. They lost their defensive coordinator to a lateral move with Penn State. What are your initial thoughts on that, Jeremy?
Well, it was really odd. We knew as soon as we started hearing the rumors, we knew something had to be up. We started remembering some things that we read on some different Buckeye sites.
And I'm gonna have you hold on there. And by the way, we've gotten a lot better so far in the first couple of minutes here. But we like to interrupt each other. It's our favorite thing to do. So just kind of go along with the flow, ladies and gentlemen. But I wanted to stop you right there for 1 second, Jeremy. I think you went down a rabbit hole. Okay, I think I mentioned something to you about, man, this just seems odd. Why take the lateral move? You're just coming off a national championship. You're not going for a head coaching job, or you're not heading to the NFL, or any of those things that you normally would see after, a big season like the Buckeyes had, or like Michigan had in 2023. So I guess the question I have to ask you, Jeremy, is is this a good thing for Ohio State, or is this really, really bad?
Well, I mean, think about this. Over the last 3 years, the defense has improved a tremendous amount versus the first few years with Ryan Day, wouldn't you say?
I would. I would. I think that's a very fair observation.
We started diving into this and some of the things that we remembered reading some things on Bucknuts and 11 Warriors. We read some different things talking about something going on after the Oregon game between the coaching staff and Jim Knowles.
And we actually talked about that, Jeremy. I think it was a couple of weeks later, right? Because I think I might have mentioned to you, hey man, I heard there's some rift or something, and we kind of just blew it off like, we don't know, because nobody was reporting it, right? We kind of heard one or two guys make a comment, and then we kind of just moved on because, hell, we're in the middle of a college football season. You don't got time for that nonsense during a season. So
Hmm.
I think we just kind of moved on, but it kind of makes you wonder a little bit looking back. And I believe, based off this rabbit hole that we went down, I think we can date it back, and I believe that's where we start our investigation, quote unquote, is at that Oregon game. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, we looked back at it because, I mean, when we started looking back at it was after you guys won the national championship. Congrats to the Buckeyes for winning that. That's especially the way they did it. We noticed that the defense got tremendously better this year. The last few years, you and I have talked, and I keep bringing up the fact that they're not getting any pressure on the quarterback.
You sure have.
In 2022, they had 34 sacks as a team. In 23, they had 28. In the first 6 games, including the Oregon game, they had 17. That's
Wow.
2.54 sacks per game. It's not horrendous, but coming off of Ohio State having Urban Meyer and having these defensive ends that he just turned loose on the quarterback, it was a big difference. For the next 10 games, Ohio State played a much tougher schedule than they had in the previous years, and they went up more than a sack per game during that time.
Wow.
In that same time, you're talking about going from in 2022, they played three teams that were ranked scoring wise in the top 20. They had three teams in 23 that scored in the top 20 as well. In those games, those six games, actually, we'll say seven because Oregon was obviously in the top 20 this year as well.
Correct.
So in those seven games combined, Ohio State let 30 points a game go through. 30 points a game against the top 20 teams. On all the other games, they were allowing 14 points a game. And in the first couple seasons, it kind of looks like Ohio State and Jim Knowles feasted on bad offenses and they kind of got beat up a little bit with the top 20 scorers.
And Jeremy, it's easy to hide. As we're actually, it's kind of funny. As we're sitting here having this conversation, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking about what my thoughts were the previous years, right? And I'm thinking about when I look at a team at the Buckeyes at the end of the season, I look at it as a whole, right? I look at the defense, I look at the offense, so on and so forth. And I never really had a big, huge impression after you broke down to me that they were feasting off these smaller ranked universities on offense. And I think something that hid that from people, because you would hear about how the Buckeyes got a good defense and their defense is playing really well, and you'd hear all these things. But I think the part that hit a lot of that is everybody looked at their team, right? And they're like, well, yeah, they got 5 stars everywhere. They have, big name guys. They have all these guys. No wonder they're making it look easy or they're playing a good defense. They have the guys to do it. But like you were just saying a minute ago, when you break it down based on sacks and pressures and all this other stuff, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing at that time. They were just feasting, like you said, off of the offenses that weren't very good.
Yeah, they kind of built their numbers up against the worse offenses. They weren't as good against the better offenses. So along with that, not only in those next 10 games after something happened there and they started going after the quarterback more. I mean, everybody kind of noticed that, right?
Very much so.
Well, they also went up one whole tackle for loss per game on average over 10 games. And let's not forget, this is a much tougher run that they had to go through, right?
Oh, absolutely. You look at the quarterbacks they had to go up against, Jeremy. I mean, you look at some of the big name running backs that they had to go up against. You look at some of these offensive lines. I mean, Texas's offensive line was beat up, but my gosh, they're pretty good. All we heard about was Notre Dame's offensive line and Jeremiah Love and all these guys, and it just like it really never happened. Dylan Gabriel and their running attack. Tennessee and Dylan Sampson. Now, I mean, you're absolutely correct, man. They came out and something was different. Something was definitely different, Jeremy.
In those 10 games, minus the top 20 scorers in both those first 2 years, they on each year, the other offenses, minus those three games, they averaged the 88th ranked offense that Ohio State faced on a weekly basis, minus those three games in the first two seasons. And in the 24 season, that for that those six games, minus the Oregon game, and they averaged 82. I mean, after that, you're looking at they faced the number 10, 29, 17, 14, number 2, number 28. Those are some of the offenses they faced from the Oregon game on, after the Oregon game until they won the national championship.
Correct. Correct.
In the games after that point, not only did they go up in sacks, up in tackles for loss, they also gained 2 minutes in time of possession. Now, earlier this season, I remember you calling me and telling me Ohio State has a problem with their offense. They're scoring too quick. Why is that a problem?
Well, that was a problem, Jeremy, because you were putting your defense back out there, and that was allowing the other team to have a possession, and your defense wasn't getting pressure, and they were allowing drives that were sustainable.
And with this increased level and pressure and defense, wouldn't that cause teams to punt the ball sooner and
Yes,
not
it
have
would.
longer drives and give the ball back to Ohio State and have them on the have their offense on the field more?
Yes, it is.
There's how they got those 2 minutes.
You know what's funny too, man, is I remember you telling me that everything's a trickle down. This was years ago.
Mhm.
Everything's a trickle down in football, and and you if you can find if you can find the result. I'm probably going to butcher this, but if you can find the result, you could probably find the cause,
Yeah, you
right?
can trace it
And,
back.
yep, you could trace it back. And I remember you telling me about what can make defensive backs look really good. A strong defensive line.
Yeah, if you put pressure, it's going to make the defensive backs better.
Yep.
Against those top 20 scoring teams, Ohio State averaged 30 points against them in those games from Oregon and before.
Yep.
After that, it went down to 19 points per game against those same offenses, those same top 20 offenses. That's 11 points different in the same season.
Is that something very rare that happens?
I believe so. I mean, let's use, okay, we're Michigan, Ohio State fans. You and I are.
Of course, yeah.
We saw Michigan kind of come together late in the season with their defense because you had a defensive coordinator that wasn't used to coaching college. He had to get used to that. They had to get used to him. And that Michigan defense wasn't the same at the end of the season as it was in the beginning.
No, it sure wasn't.
Well, I mean, that happens sometimes, but I think this was kind of a drastic level what Ohio State did. So, what it makes me think is that this might be a good thing for Ohio State and not so good thing for anybody else facing them. Because for years, Ohio State was just going to put tons and tons of pressure on your quarterback. Hey, Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, and Chase Young, and I mean, you can go on with all these different guys that could rush the passer. And then, or Ryan Day
It
took
did.
over. Then it started going downhill. They weren't rushing the passer as much, but they were allowing a lot of points. Jim Knowles got there, and it's like it just dropped off the table. It was a significant difference in pressure on the quarterback, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. You're 100% correct.
And I was telling you earlier this season, if they're going to try and win, they're going to have to, one, protect their own guy, Will Howard, obviously, and they're going to have to put some pressure on the other team. Without that, there is no chance for Ohio State to win this title. And
And
they
they
did both of
absolutely
those things.
and they did both of them. And you know what's funny, Jeremy, is and I can be transparent. I'm very humbled about all of this.
Yeah, that's what you've
Um,
always been known for, being humble. That's your strong suit.
well, I've definitely humbled myself dramatically the past years.
I got to give you shit.
I know, but you know how I used to be, and that wasn't fun for anybody anymore. I'd rather have these types of conversations. You live and learn. Those of you out there listening, trust me, humble yourself a little bit, congratulate your rival when they win, and just enjoy your own personal win when it happens for you. I promise you're going to feel a lot better about watching football. I promise. But that's my
Absolutely.
little public service announcement. But back to what we were talking about. There were times where I was like, I was just so disgusted, right? I was just like, man, we just can't do this. We can't get the pressure like you always talk about, and I agree with 100%. We can't do these things, man. We're struggling with it. And I remember you saying to me, just like you just said, you're like, Tim, here's the deal. If you can protect Will Howard, if you can get those guys on that line or anywhere, any kind of pressure, if you can successfully, because you can always get pressure on the quarterback. It's whether you're as successful at it or not. Okay.
Hmm.
Because we've seen teams that love to do that blitz and they just get burnt every time, man.
Oh yeah.
And so you got to do it. You got to do it and be successful in it. And I remember, you saying those things to me, and I'm just like, man, I just don't see it. I don't see it. After the Michigan game, I don't see it. And then it's like a cartoon, man, where a bulb just goes over the top of the players and coaches' head. And it makes me wonder, man, based on everything you just brought up about your statistics, and those are crazy numbers, by the way. If you don't do those things, we're probably not having a conversation right now.
Absolutely. Well, you brought up the Michigan game, and I want to put this out there because you and I have talked about it many times. The reason why Ohio State lost that game was the hit that Makari Page put on Will Howard. So in that
I
instance,
agree.
you did not do the thing that you said that you needed to do. You had to
Yep.
protect the quarterback. Now he ran,
Yep.
so it's not like he just got blasted back in the
Sure.
backfield. You got to include that as far as
You do,
protecting
and
the
I'm glad
quarterback.
you brought that up because that correlates exactly with what I just said, right? Where
Hmm.
you had two things you had to do. Now, again, I'm not a jerk for feeling like it wasn't going to happen. You had absolute injuries on the offensive line, right?
Hmm.
You had a makeshift offensive line. I don't care who you are, Jeremy. You would have felt the same way if it would have been Michigan. You'd have been like, I'm sorry, dude. I don't know how we do this. I don't know how we protect the quarterback if you guys had the same depth we did. And
Absolutely.
and so I don't feel guilty about that. And our defense was not getting the numbers tell the truth. You put the numbers up there, Jeremy. The numbers were saying, hey, we're going to get 2 sacks a game, maybe. Because there was also 2 games in there we didn't get any sacks, and we feasted on other smaller name teams. So we didn't have any sacks against Oregon. 0. Okay? So that right there also tells me, based off your numbers, that we really, really feasted. If you only have 17 in 6 games and one of them's 0, that means you were feasting against the lower level teams.
Hmm.
But I love what you brought up, and I'm going to ask you a question after I make this comment. I also think that the defensive line made the cornerbacks a lot better, just like you said earlier. I gave you a stat. Prior to from the Oregon game to the Michigan game, there was 1 passing touchdown allowed. That's 6 games, 1 touchdown pass allowed against that defense. And how many times have you said the defensive line playing better and getting pressure makes your defensive backs a heck of a lot better?
Sure. Well, I
So
mean, it also
another,
makes you wonder because I know I have been very critical of your defensive line over the last few years. And from the Oregon game on, you're talking about JT had 3 sacks in the first 6 games. He had 9.5 after that.
whoa.
Let's look at Sawyer. Sorry, I'm pulling this up because I wasn't prepared to actually do this and it just came to me. So I
I
said,
love
screw it,
it.
let's
No,
pull
I
this
love it.
up.
You know what, man? These people want to know these types of things. They're loving this conversation, man. They want to know.
All right.
It's all
Before the
good.
Oregon game, Jack Sawyer had 2.5 sacks. After that, he had 6.5. And this is against much tougher competition. He had 1.5 against Indiana, number 2 scoring team in the country, 1.5 against Tennessee, 2 against Oregon, 1 against Texas. Think about this. They barely got any sacks. They had 1 sack, I believe, against Michigan. We didn't barely throw the ball. Michigan didn't barely throw the ball.
Right? That's right.
So
16 times?
if that was a normal Michigan passing team, would there have been another couple sacks in there?
Maybe. Yeah.
And that's kind of my point. I'm looking at some of these and say, hey, are the numbers a little skewed right now because Michigan didn't have a passing offense this year? And one
But
of the
no.
games they played was against a team who couldn't pass the ball.
But another thing too is that you're going to have games like that. But Jack Sawyer 3 times his sack total.
Hmm.
JT did 5 times his sack total.
I mean, Notre Dame couldn't really throw the ball, consistently. They had to run the
No.
ball with Riley Leonard, and they had to run the ball with their stable of running backs. But
Yeah.
against an Ohio State or a Penn State, they're not putting the ball up 40 times a game.
No, they sure aren't, Jeremy. And I want to tell you something. I really do appreciate you going down this rabbit hole because I didn't want, and I still don't. I'm super happy for Jim Knowles. I thank him for being a part of this national championship. I got no ill will against Jim Knowles, but I have to ask you a question. What do you think happened? Something happened, sir.
I think something happened where there was some sort of questioning of Jim Knowles. And from the things that we hear, he's
Mm-hmm.
not the most personable coach.
Well, we've read, you and I both have read, I think it was last night or the night before, I think you read something to me that said that other coaches would be out in the common area, socializing and, maybe having a beer or something, and Jim Knowles would be separate in his own office.
But here's the other thing. He didn't want to have four defensive linemen. He wanted to have his 3-3-5. He was forced to have four defensive linemen. Then it looks like he was forced to change some things defensively, like scheme wise, to scheme up more pressure. And I think he was like, you know what? You want to question me? You guys can do it yourself. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to go someplace else where they'll just let me do my thing, and you guys can find somebody else that you can question and change their defense and all that. Now, I don't know that that's what happened, just my guess. But what I'm going to say is this. If he goes back to his Oklahoma State defense, the Big Ten's going to feast on Penn State. I'll tell you that right now.
I
Because if
couldn't
they do a
agree with you more.
3-3-5 with teams that can run the ball, no chance. No chance.
And I don't want to take a swipe at Penn State at all, but I like how a lot of these quote unquote experts have Penn State winning it all next year. I just want to remind everybody, Penn State's defense wasn't the problem last year. Penn State had a pretty good defense. So I understand the thought of bringing in Jim Knowles, and I'm not going to say anything more about Penn State because this isn't really about Penn State, but I think Penn State's going to have a very, very interesting year next year, one way or another, sir. What do you think?
I'm very intrigued to see how Jim Knowles runs that defense. Has he learned anything, and has he changed anything? Because as you go, you should be incorporating something from every team that you change. You should be taking something and potentially adapting and changing some things on your scheme, just how you call it. You
I
should be adapting as you go. And if you don't, that's an issue.
I think that this is definitely one of those situations that kind of caught us off guard a little bit. But based on what we're hearing at this point, it doesn't really sound like it was that big of a deal either way. I think Ohio State they're gonna probably promote from within. Matt Gutierrez is looking like a pretty good bet to be the next defensive coordinator. But that doesn't mean they're not gonna go out and try to find somebody else as well. What that means, I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure that Ryan Day and Larry Johnson and those guys, Tim Walton, I think they're all having a conversation and they're kind of starting to see probably there's a certain type of guy and a certain type of defense that Ohio State's going to want to run. And I got to agree with you, Jeremy. I think if we get back to the defenses of old, now listen, Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa and Chase Young and Sam Hubbard aren't walking through those doors. I get it, but
why aren't they? The only way
because
they're not is if Ohio State isn't recruiting them. Ohio
right.
State's in the top 5 every year with recruiting.
Right, but what I meant by that is I understand that when we had that defense, we were running the ball to the ball with pressure on the quarterback. We had those guys. I do understand that. And those are guys that have, really done very well in the NFL. So they were big-name guys. And we started seeing it with Michigan. I want to bring Michigan into this for a minute. You got your Aiden Hutchinson and your Ajabo and, Josiah Stewart this year, which, by the way, side note, I've been watching Josiah Stewart in the Senior Bowl. I was going to say I'm kind of glad he's gone. We saw what Michigan could do when they were getting after that quarterback, and they had guys like Hutch and them. And I think you're 100% right, Jeremy. I think you hit the nail on the head with all of this. I think it's a good thing for Ohio State. I don't think they're gonna take too big of a step back. You still got arguably the best defensive player in the country in Caleb Downs, and I think that I think they're going to be just fine, sir. What are your final thoughts?
I believe the same. I think it's going to be right now they're looking at Matt Guerrieri. I think they're also looking at Tim Walton. I wouldn't be shocked if there's potentially a co-defensive coordinator position between the two of them. If I was to guess, I'd say something like that is to help get Matt Guerrieri some experience, and Tim Walton would be like the guy who called the plays. There is still a possibility that they go outside of Ohio State and find somebody else and bring them in. Ohio State's a big name. They've got the money to spend. They're going to find the right guy for them, whether it be on the staff currently or somebody that's outside the program to come in and help change or help put that defense going forward in 2025.
That's not bad news for me and other Buckeye fans. Jeremy, listen, I appreciate you inviting me back to do this. This has been awesome. It's been fun. I think we hit on a lot of topics. What I would like to see happen is when we post this, I want to see people post under there and comment. What do you guys want to hear us talk about? Post under there. Ask us questions or maybe a topic that we're not very familiar about that we can investigate and get to know, or ask us something and let's see what we can come up with and make these kind of fun. We're keep them at a half hour, 25 minutes. That way it's easy listening for everybody. And Jeremy and I can also just have a conversation like we're doing now and enjoy ourselves as well. So leave us a comment, like it, share it, do all that other stuff. It'll help us get more out there. And we do appreciate every single person that took time out to listen to this. Jeremy, you have anything else you want to add?
Don't forget to go on to Twitter and follow me there at Big Ten Football Junkies. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channel, which this will also be posted on there. That's the Big Ten Football Junkies that has every recruit, their highlight video. I put as many up there as I can. There's some that it's really hard to find some of the film, but I trust me, I do a lot of searching for it. But we'll see what we'll go there, follow them, look at them. We'll have some different videos up of some draft stuff. Whether we show Will Howard in some stuff, Emeka Ibuka, Abdul Carter, and show some of that for the upcoming NFL draft from the Big Ten prospects.
Yeah, and I add one more thing real quick. We will be doing some sort of podcast involving the draft and involving the Big Ten players. I'm not sure we'll hit on every single one of them, but the big name guys, I'm almost positive we'll do something with. And Jeremy and I will text back and forth and have conversations about that. And until the next time, Jeremy, thanks again, man. Appreciate everything.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.